What's going on, sports fans? Once again, it's K2 the GOAT for Vernon Speak Sports, mostly talking about Auburn football and the rest of the SEC. Want to give a shout out to my fearless and true gang, War Eagle. A few months from now, the Auburn Tigers will take on Oregon Ducks in a very high consequential non-conference game for the Auburn Tigers in Arlington, Texas, in the Advocare Classic. Now, Auburn has been pretty much a regular in these opening season games, playing Washington last year in the Chick-fil-A Classic, Kickoff Classic in Atlanta, Georgia, against, ironically, a Pac-12 team who came into the season with high aspirations to win the Pac-12 conference and possibly be a playoff caliber team in the Washington Huskies. As it turns out, Auburn beat the Washington Huskies 21-16 in that particular football game, and just as Washington planned, turned out to be the Pac-12 champions last year, representing the Pac-12 in the Rose Bowl. Now, as we come into this season, Oregon comes into this football season with their quarterback coming back. He had planned to go to the NFL, and as it turns out, he decides to come back and play for his senior season. That none other than Justin Herbert, who is 6'6", and he's a very physical quarterback. He has a great ability and vision down the field. Once he gets going, he has a unique ability to dissect defenses, and his offense is very vertical in nature. He does like to throw that screen pass, and when you look at these guys on film, they're very similar in how they like to approach the offensive side of the football, very similar to when Gus Malzahn is calling plays. They like to do a little tempo here and there, like to utilize a little run-pass option. Saw that, especially when playing against Oregon State. Their defense is very, very, very talented. They are not necessarily physical, but in their high-consequence games, like when they played against Washington, was very physical at the point of attack, got around the football very aggressively. And I don't think Oregon will come into this game light on that defensive line. They did lose during the course of the offseason a very good Mike linebacker, but they have returning in their interior defensive line. They have returning in their interior defensive line Jordan Scott. I saw a lot of him on film. He's the nose tackle. He really does a great job of clogging the interior line of scrimmage, which will be kind of important in this particular game. And it's going to be really important to see who the H-back is going to be, because he's going to have H-back for Auburn is because he's going to have his hands full with Jordan Scott, the nose tackle for Oregon. And on Auburn's side of the football, a lot of optimism because obviously they have most of their defensive personnel returning, including Derek Brown and Marlon Davis. Look for KJ Britt, who was a sophomore at that linebacker position, to really emerge as a force in that Mike linebacker position for the Auburn Tigers. Also should be getting some help from Michael Harris as well at that linebacker position. Auburn also returns a wealth of talent in the secondary, which will be tested against Justin Herbert and the Oregon Ducks. Now, when I think about a game like this, it's the opening game of the season. You lose a game like this, and if you have a pretty successful season long term, especially if this turns out to be your only loss, it shouldn't be very consequential because, you lose this game, very high consequence game in a neutral site. You lose it relatively close, maybe a touchdown or so. It shouldn't really damage your season at the surface. But when you look at the totality of the circumstance and you look at the SEC and the Pac-12, you will find that this thing is not necessarily as simple as one may believe. Auburn arguably has one of the toughest schedules in college football, as they not only have to face Oregon, they have Texas A&M, Mississippi State, Florida, LSU, Georgia, and Alabama. All of those teams are very, very poised to have great seasons. You can flip any amount of these teams, and you could be looking at the possible SEC champion, even Florida, who I think did an incredible job last year, ended the season very well. Auburn actually has to go to Gainesville to play against Florida. So when you look at one aspect of this, when you think about which team has the most to lose, you got to look at the surface. When you look at these schedules, you got to think Auburn, because Auburn with a loss here, could be very damaging when in going into a very physical, emotionally driven SEC schedule, which when you look at this thing, you got to look at the prospect of Auburn losing at least one of these games down, at least one game down the stretch. Especially when you look at the brutal stretch between Texas A&M and LSU. They got Florida sandwiched in between Mississippi State. All of these teams, like I said before, are poised to have good seasons. And then when you factor in injuries, things get real testy down the stretch for the Auburn Tigers. So when I look at this game at the surface, just from the scheduling standpoint, I think Auburn has the most to lose because after, this game against, Oregon, it doesn't get any easier for the Auburn Tigers as they are facing contenders on a week in and week out basis. And not to discredit the Oregon Ducks football schedule this season, they have a pretty tough road ahead as well. Starting off the season against the Auburn Tigers is no easy feat because Oregon is coming into this game really not knowing how to approach the Auburn Tigers. Because if they were to look at Auburn on film outside of the Liberty and Purdue game, they're basically looking at an anemic offense. So what they probably will have to do is kind of look at Gus Malzahn's tendencies when he had a dual threat quarterback, and probably the best film for them to study is the 2013 and 2014 season. Of course, the personnel are going to be different, but the way Gus Malzahn utilizes that personnel is going to be important when, we really look at how Oregon is going to have to approach this potentially dangerous Auburn offense. Of course, Auburn has the question mark as to who's going to be the starting quarterback. But one thing we do know, coming into this season for the first time since Nick Marshall, Gus Malzahn will have a very willing dual threat quarterback. And by willing, I mean someone who actually wants to run the football and who doesn't mind running the football, not a quote unquote dual threat quarterback who uses his running ability kind of as a decoy to get teams off balance, but actually being an integral part of the run pass option. So at that point, when I look at the schedules and I look at what Auburn has facing them, comparatively speaking to what Oregon possibly has to face, I think, Auburn has the most to lose here. Because when you look at Oregon's schedule, of course, they have a very tough schedule as well. Considering the Pac-12, of course, they have to play against Stanford, who is usually pretty tough. California is pretty good from time to time. Washington State emerges every now and then. And, of course, the rival game against Oregon State, which they have pretty much handled for the past season or so. But even still, when I look at this schedule compared to what Auburn has to face in the SEC, in my honest, non-biased opinion, is just no comparison to the physicality that Auburn and the physicality and the level of talent that Auburn is going to have to face on a week in and week out basis. It's going to be very tough for Auburn to lose this particular game and still have that emotional and physical momentum going into the season. Number two, from a recruiting standpoint, I think Auburn at this point, now Oregon has just signed a very top-rated recruiting class, very big on quality. Auburn has as well. But see, the thing about this is Auburn is going to be playing this game in Arlington, Texas. The SEC has a couple of teams, obviously Texas A&M, who recruit pretty heavy, obviously in Texas, because, that's where the school is. And then you have LSU, who has a lot of their talent from Texas. Winning this game could be a huge opportunity for the Auburn Tigers to actually have some kind of blueprint in Texas. Maybe get a guy who has never really seen Auburn play. And if Auburn can have an impressive win over Oregon, that could be a new kind of stomping ground recruiting wise for the Auburn Tigers. Auburn it was able to get Jarrett Stidham via transfer, but I'm talking about a guy right out of high school, being able to see Auburn in that environment, in that arena, to see Auburn firsthand, the fan base, how they approach the football game. And for Auburn to be impressive in this opening football game could be very consequential, even in the recruiting trail, especially as they try to venture out, past, to the southwestern part of the country with their recruiting efforts. A big home run recruit, in my opinion, for Auburn as far as expanding their recruiting influence geographically was picking up Cameron Kelly out of Chesapeake, Virginia. Athlete out of Chesapeake, Virginia, who had committed to Virginia Tech. Now he comes to the Auburn Tigers. That's very good influence-wise. So I think from a recruiting standpoint, Auburn definitely has to win this football game, and preferably win it pretty handedly. And last but not least, when you think about consequences, Gus Malzahn is obviously on the radar. I mean, we can say that he's on the hot seat. We really don't know what's going on administrative-wise with the Auburn Tigers and, the back-end athletic director-wise. It appears that Alan Green has is supporting Gus Malzahn and helping him put some of the pieces together to make this a successful season. Had a very decent recruiting class. And this is a very important win for Gus Malzahn. One thing that I do believe coaching-wise has to happen. You get red zone scoring going, touchdowns in the Washington game, that game is not even close. The key to this particular football game, I believe, based on what I've seen on film and based on Gus Malzahn's history in calling plays, I don't think moving the football is going to be a problem, because it wasn't technically a problem against Washington. The problems came in the red zone. In a game like this, when Oregon, because Washington stormed back very quickly, because 3 points is way different than 7 points. When Auburn gets in the red zone, the mentality has to be we got to score touchdowns in the red zone. That will be ultimately the difference in this particular football game, and whether Auburn can pull away from a game like this versus letting a team that's very talented, that's very lethal offensively, hang around for the duration of the game and possibly steal that game from you in the end. So I think when you look at it from that perspective, Gus Malzahn has to understand that this is right now, this particular game will be one of the biggest games of his career moving forward because of recruiting, because of getting off to a great start and giving yourself an opportunity to make a run in the SEC, and also for job protection at this point. Gus Malzahn has to win this game, and preferably not winning this game by a field goal. This has to be a game which was well in hand for a somewhat dominating affair for the Auburn Tigers. And looking at Oregon on film, not to discredit them in any way, they got a great recruiting class coming up. This is an opportunity because of Oregon not being able to really have a solid blueprint on what this offense will look like. And all the weapons that Auburn has coming back, could be opportunity that Gus Malzahn and his staff, his very capable staff, has to look forward to. I think this is going to be an incredible game. I'm definitely excited to see the opportunities really for both teams because, Oregon has a very respectable program, very good athletes. The game that Auburn played with them back in 2010 was incredible. The fan bases, form some relationships during that particular game that, kind of talk trash back and forth because of meeting in that game. And I think it's a very healthy rematch coming into 2019 for the Auburn Tigers and the Oregon Ducks. Once again, it's Case 2 to go for Vernon Speaks Sports, mostly talking about Auburn football and the rest of the SEC. Want to give a shout out to my fearless and true gang. We're on YouTube, baby. Like, comment, and subscribe. You all have a good day.